thank you once again for joining us on Getting to the Top, where I interview transformational leaders about their transformational journey. This is where my hope is that in doing this, we're able to inspire new and diverse leaders to pursue leadership. And if you're already a leader, hoping to inspire you to choose an even more aggressive path, or to change the world through maximizing our potential as human beings and recognizing the need for diversity at the top as we all seek to be our best selves and get to the top. Today, I have with me Miss Allison Demas. Allison, I met as the chairman of the National Carnival Commission of Trinidad and Tobago. She's a former attorney at law. She's turned entrepreneur with over 15 years of experience in monitoring media and content. She's pioneered digital tracking of music on radio. Her focus is tracking and measuring and analyzing media content and things like news and advertising, marketing campaigns, etc. And she's just has always been, a fierce Caribbean leader and committed to Caribbean integration. And I think that media is certainly a way to get us to do that. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you very much, Racquel. And it's great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me on your podcast.
It's great. I ran into you and I was like, oh my goodness, I have to speak to Allison, because I just remember, Carnival, as much as it is enjoyed a lot by women, it is so dominated by men. And so so I remember when you were head of the Carnival Commission, it was quite refreshing to see you in that role. And I remember, you were unapologetic about it, and you led fiercely and confidently. And I said, that's how we all need to lead.
Thank you.
So I've been wanting to have this conversation to you prior to the podcast. So at least now I have an excuse to ask you all of the questions I've always wanted to ask.
Fire away.
So tell me about how it all started. Tell me about like growing up, school days. What were you like?
Well, I was born into a household with two parents who were very committed to the whole idea of Caribbean integration. My late father was an economist, a technocrat, and he was very instrumental in the development of like the CARICOM Treaty. He was head of the CARICOM Secretariat, Caribbean Development Bank, and he always practiced what he preached. So he started by integrating with my mother, who is Jamaican. They met while they were students in London. And he always accepted positions in the region, even though he was offered outside. So I was very much grounded in being a Caribbean person. And I was born in Trinidad and Tobago, but grew up in Jamaica, Barbados, Guyana, coming back to TNT. And then later on, as a student, I studied in London, in the UK, and then I did postgraduate work in New Hampshire, USA. So that sort of gave me a view of where the Caribbean stood in the world. And it really had an impact and influence, I think, what I am today, a very proud Caribbean woman.
Wonderful. So what did you study? What were you interested in back then?
Well, actually, I ended up studying law. And you could say that was kind of like by default, in that, I grew up in a household with, two professionals. And they never put any pressure on me to do law, but I felt, okay, well, I wasn't good at maths, so I couldn't do economics. I was good at science, I couldn't do sciences, so I was good in sorts of the arts and, social studies.
Yeah.
So kind of chose law, but I have no regrets, because it really gave me a solid foundation, for further work.
I find that a lot, and you find that lawyers are typically very well read, and they're good readers and great at like comprehending complex issues. And a friend of mine,
you that kind of logic that you can apply, especially in business. I find it extremely useful having that grounded.
Absolutely. So we understand how you ended up on the path of law, because you weren't good at math. And so then you leave law school, and then what do you decide to do?
So I left, and I I'm trying to think. There were so many different periods in my life. So in fact, I did postgraduate work in London, in the UK. And I started off, got married, came back to Trinidad, and I got very much interested in copyright and copyright law. So even though I had not formally studied, I sort of read voraciously, and I took a real interest. I became involved in the board of the Corporate Music Organization Trinidad Tobago, COT. And then having been, involved in copyright, I decided, okay, listen, maybe I need to get some certification. So I then decided to do a master's, which I did in New Hampshire in the US. And whilst there, I was headhunted to become the CEO of COT. So when I came back, I headed COT. And I really enjoyed that because it gave me an exposure to so many things, to business, to management, as well, as the whole field of communications and marketing. So it really opened up my eyes.
So you started at the top. You didn't sort of meander through a career trying to figure out. You were headhunted shortly
Well,
after.
I should say I started off as a lawyer in private practice.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So,
and when you got
I didn't just start at the top.
I was like, that's fortuitous. Out the womb. So, so what was that first CEO assignment like? And I don't know, for those of us who either have been in the public service or contemplating public service is not easy. It is a challenge.
No, it's certainly not. So COT is actually private. It's not a government entity.
Okay.
However, it is a non-profit.
Okay.
So all the royalties collected go back to the rights owners, the songwriters,
very nice.
composers, music publishers.
So this was put together by the private sector. That's wonderful. I really thought it was a government initiative.
No.
That's magnificent. We need to see more of that.
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
But okay, so I run a nonprofit now. That is tough.
It is.
Because you have to think about the people you're responsible for.
Exactly, your stakeholders, your members.
Yeah. And how you are delivering value to them every single day.
Exactly. Yes.
So what was your leadership style in that time?
It was still very much what it is today. So I led with empathy. At the same time, I set clear boundaries. Okay. And of course, being the CEO of COT, again, predominantly a male-dominated environment, at that time, dealing with all the calypsonians and even the soca writers and so on, mainly, again, men and older men. And there was I, a young woman. And our culture.
Yes.
So like I said, from very early, I set very clear boundaries. No, I'm not accepting any gifts, any invitations to have drinks or anything like that. But I think because of my command of the subject matter, I was able to earn their respect, which I think is very important. And once you have respect, then it's easier to get people to cooperate and to listen to you. And then also I was able to sort of change the image. So instead of coming down as law enforcement, I took a more sort of marketing approach and encourage businesses to use music, how it will increase their customers, make their customers, go back. So if you are in a restaurant, if you're fast food, you might want to pay fast music because you want that fast turnover. Whereas if you're kind of fine dining, you want a kind of softer music so people sort of linger a bit longer.
Keep ordering.
Yeah, so I was able to show how using music in your business can in fact increase your bottom line. So I took a different approach because, you're dealing with many stakeholders. Yes, of course, the rights owners, who are, like I said, the songwriters, the composers, the music publishers, but then you're also dealing with the business community. They're also important stakeholders because they're the ones who, pay the royalties.
So back to the topic of not accepting any invitations to go out and have drinks when, it is such a part of our culture and such a part of the way that we network and how we engage and everywhere, it's part of this sort of old boys club is, we go have a drink and so how do you, yes, your command of the subject matter, but I think any sort of woman in leadership needs to have a command of the subject matter because you don't get there by accident.
Exactly.
So how did you navigate forming those bonds and creating those relationships without relying on that, okay, well, let's go have a drink. And for the people who aren't as familiar with Trinidad and Tobago and how we go have a drink, it's not a sophisticated affair most times, you're not going to like a fancy place. It is, you stand up on the side of the road with a bottle and you have a drink. And that's, when you're talking about boundary management, that is sort of the antithesis of boundary management. So what was that like to develop those relationships without having that to rely on?
So, it is, again, your whole approach, the way you communicate. So in terms of the members, what I did, I tried to educate them. So I would have, famous songwriters. So I remember like inviting people like Marshall, Sharon Winchester, Nadia Batson, and we would have meetings where they would come and they would explain and share with the rest of the team their journey. And I would then introduce various aspects of copyright, which is quite a complex subject matter, like other areas of intellectual property. And like I said, so I think, that way I was able to build up respect, build up a culture of learning, respect for the creative process, and so on.
So paying for music at that time, I don't think was the norm and the commonplace, and people just expected.
It certainly was.
Yeah, and even today, I think people balk at having to pay.
Pay
for that experience, which is unfortunate because a lot goes into and for those artists to kind of stick it out, and you only hear about the ones who make it big, but there are others who are sort of trudging in the background, creating
90% actually.
The
reality is that, of 100%, only, the top 10% really are the ones that really earn a decent living from their, creative efforts. That's the reality.
So what was that like trying to convince people in those times, that yes, this is going to increase your bottom line, but you're gonna...
It certainly wasn't an easy process, but I had a deliberate strategy, and like I said, I think with education, more sort of friendlier, market savvy communication, I think I was able to get the message across. And it was also the time when we started to have music online. So I was able to negotiate some of the first, royalty agreements for payment of music online. So I was able to introduce the digital tracking of music on radio. And that was during sort of the end of my tenure at COTS. And I was figuring out what to do next. I thought, should I go back into private practice? But I really liked the business bug had caught me. So, with the encouragement of my husband and my mother, I decided to create Media InSite.
Okay.
And I realized, well, if you can track music content, there's other media content you can track. So I started off with advertisements, and then I, launched into other kinds of content, social media, public relations campaigns, and so on.
Yeah. So then so what happened after that? How did you end up at Carnival Commission?
Well, that was actually a non-executive position. So I was appointed to the board as chair. And that was an experience I will never forget.
Public service.
Because I came in again as, the first woman. And I was still, relatively young. And again, so dominated by men. And there's such deep vested interest in Carnival.
Yeah.
And I felt,
it's
I always tell
personal.
people when they ask me, what was that experience like? I said it was like swimming against the tide in a shark-infested ocean. It was not easy.
So tell me about a challenge. Tell me about a specific challenge without naming names, obviously, but tell me about a specific sort of challenge.
Well, again, so NCC is definitely a government entity. And I think the reality, like I said, is that you have these deep, historically vested interests. And, you know, people were reluctant to change. Even the internal governance of the NCC. I mean, I had PricewaterhouseCoopers come in and I introduced financial policies and procedures. And I revamped the entire tendering process. So you can imagine I wasn't very popular in certain sectors, but I think that, you know, overall people realized that, you know, I didn't have any sort of, you know, commercial vested interest, and I really wanted to introduce good governance, which I think was appreciated.
Was that your first board role?
No.
Okay.
I had been on the board of, like I said, in fact, had been once the equivalent. I was the non-executive president of COT. I also served on the board of the Shagaramas Development Authority. I served on the board of...
I met you there as well.
Yes. I served on, this was the precursor to like Fashion TT, Music TT. It was then known as IDCO, the Entertainment Industry Development Company. So I had a history of serving on boards. I had previous roles at board level in relation to being on the board of the Shagaramas Development Authority, on the board of IDCO, which was the precursor to like Music TT, Fashion TT, Film TT. So yes, it was not my first venture at board level.
And going back to sort of serving on a board, I think it's for many women, it's quite mysterious. Like, what happens at the board level? How do you prepare yourself? How do you get noticed to serve on a board? You know, take us through some of that.
Well, I think it's basically, you know, once you develop, you know, a reputation in your field, and, you know, people see that, yes, you're competent, that you can add value, you know, that you do have leadership abilities. Basically, you have to engender confidence, you know, in the public, in the business sector, in the government sector.
And is there anything that you would recommend above and beyond sort of deep knowledge within the sector and sort of preparation? Was there anything else that you did to engender confidence?
I think it's important to establish, you know, thought leadership. So now, you know, we are living in the age of social media, blogs, you know, B2B environments like LinkedIn and so on. But I guess back in those days, it was a question of, you know, like, you know, writing articles, you know, getting interviewed in the traditional media then. Now, of course, we have podcasts and so on.
So when you were serving on the board, I think there's a lot to get used to, right? You know, you have to review board papers, you have to get familiar with the entity that you're serving on the board of, you have to be mindful of things like good governance that you mentioned,
yes.
And all of those things. Like, you know, how did you prepare to serve, or what were your special sort of rituals?
Again, having a legal background helped. Yes. Because, you know, there's a lot of reading that goes involved. Certainly if you are chairing the meetings, right, you would have to have read all the board papers, you know, mastered what was happening, and basically, you know, being able to sort of take command and lead the entire deliberations, you know, arriving at decisions, people, especially in the creative sector, are kind of passionate.
Yes.
And, they may not conform to your typical corporate environment, in terms of expressing their views. So again, without being offensive, you have to sort of, like gently rein them in, but at the same time, let them be able to vent and express their views. But at the same time, sort of steer them back to the direction in which you want the meeting to go.
You mentioned CDA, right? Chaguaramas Development Authority. That would have been very, very different from a COT where you're dealing with music. This was dealing with land, and so how do you wrap your arms around something like that?
Again, it's all about corporate governance, ensuring that there's equity in terms of the leases. Ensuring that there's the respect for that Western Peninsula, which is so important for us in terms of, environmentally. But it's the same principles, knowing, what the purpose of the entity is. If it's a statutory authority, ensuring that you're familiar with the act establishing the CDA. And again, just, ensuring that you act in accordance, with good governance, and that you're equitable in your decisions. Yeah.
So what was, throughout your career, what's been the best advice you've been given?
I think the best advice I was given was by my mother, who years ago said, Allison, the reality is this is a man's world, and therefore you have to work harder, even though you may be brighter than a lot of men around you.
Okay. And you took that to heart?
I took that to heart, and I still think it's true today, even in 2022.
It absolutely is. And the bar is always higher for us. I mean, you don't just have to be smarter. You have to, people judge you by your appearance. You have to sort of tick every single box to just be eligible.
Yeah. There's such double standards, but I would say, that like be focused. Whatever you want to do in life, just be focused and just keep working towards, achieving your goals, and try not to be detracted. You'll have lots of detractors along the way. But like I said, just be single-minded and focused.
So how do you stay motivated? Understanding that, especially when you were like that swimming against the tide in an ocean full of sharks.
Because, I'm committed to my country, to my region. At the time, I was committed, and still am, to the creative sector. Now my interests are broadened, so it's, the media environment. And, that's what really keeps me going. Apart from which, I am a mother, a wife. So my family is very important to me. And, they give me that motivation and encouragement.
So the focus on, one of the things that I'm equally passionate about is this regional integration, and just wondering if I gave you a magic wand and there were one thing that you could do to make us more regionally integrated, what would that thing be? What would you want to see?
I would love to see true integration, not sort of top-down approach, but really integration of people. And I see that most in the Eastern Caribbean. Mm-hmm. There's a sense of togetherness, which we may not feel in TNT, certainly not in Jamaica. But I would really wish that we could really just be, one region, one Caribbean. We would be such a much stronger force,
And you don't think you're not seeing that happening? You're not seeing that happening. I'm certainly seeing progress in that direction.
I'm seeing progress, but it's not fast enough for me, so that even though, I operate in Trinidad and Tobago, we in fact monitor media across the region. We're in 18 Caribbean countries. Nice. So I like to provide that holistic view of the Caribbean media landscape.
And in looking at that, Caribbean media landscape, that would definitely give you a perspective about what's happening and how integrated are we and how cohesive are we.
Yes, yes.
You
like
know,
I said, I do see pockets of it, and it's certainly, stronger in some areas, than others. But yes, that continues to be my dream. One of these days.
I'm going to ask you a chicken or egg question. Do you think that the Eastern Caribbean is more integrated because they share a single currency, or do you think that they share a single currency because they are more integrated?
Yeah, I think they share a single currency because they're more integrated. And the reason why they're more integrated is that the average person moves easily, whether it be like, on a ferry. So the movement between St. Lucia and Martinique, or the movement between, Grenada, St. Vincent, you find much more, intra-regional travel by the average person, whereas Trinidad, where do we go? We go to New York, Miami, Toronto, and some of us have never perhaps been to another Caribbean island country.
That's true. And I think, but I think, what tends to happen, I think because also we have a different economic base that tends to separate us as well, because we feel as though we're different.
Yes.
And in feeling that we're different, we kind of sometimes say and do things that don't always support us getting more closely integrated with our neighbors.
Yes. And I think, of course, because we've been an oil and gas, economy for so long, and we've had, relatively, well-established economic base. We've sort of maybe, not treated our fellow Caribbean neighbors as we should. And I think that is certainly brought out, for example, in the recent tensions we've seen coming out of Guyana, which is understandable, to some extent.
Yeah. But it's interesting. I think now we're at that point where we are, certainly with COVID, and I don't know if I'd give credit to COVID, but I'm seeing more integration, and it tends to sort of coalesce around having a common foe. And whether it is, there is this external force, there is this, we are beginning to realize that we're all small together, or we're all facing economic challenges together.
Sure.
I feel like it's bringing us together. I'm certainly having far more regional conversations in the last 2 years than I had maybe the year before.
Sure. And I think having a quote unquote Caribbean Prime Minister who's based in Barbados has certainly helped.
Oh my goodness, listen to me. I am
someone who really advocates globally, for the region. I think that has certainly helped tremendously.
Fabulous. And again, when we talk about this high bar, she's, there's such a high bar, and then somehow she manages to pole vault over the bar.
Oh yes, amazing.
To the utter amazement of all of us.
Yeah.
So, I'm definitely flying a very proud Caribbean flag, and that's
so if we had more leaders by her, oh yes, definitely we would achieve that integration.
But what we're seeing is that other prime ministers are attempting to also get their time in the sun. And I think that's beautiful that she has opened up a window that allows us to realize that we are, in fact, have always punched well above our weight. And so it's possible. She's exposed within us what's possible.
Oh, yes, indeed. Yes.
So magnificent.
Sure.
So magnificent.
Absolutely.
What a great note for us to end on. Allison, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I really, really appreciate it. And I've always wondered, about this phenomenal woman who's on all of these boards and, unapologetic, but always quite, it's not like you're gentle but firm. And I've always liked that. I should ask you, what's your leadership style? It's still empathetic. You mentioned that. It's empathetic and listening.
But still firm. I set clear strategic goals, and I expect people to meet those goals.
Yes, good. So Allison, thank you once again, and
thank you, Racquel.
And thank you for listening to Getting to the Top, where we talk to transformational leaders about their leadership journey. We really appreciate you spending this time with us, and I hope that we've inspired you to enhance your leadership journey and certainly to do what you can to get to the top. If you haven't already, please like or subscribe, and we really appreciate your time. Thank you.